The gift came through the east gate at 11 minutes past 10 on a Thursday morning, and the first thing I noticed about it was that the man carrying it would not let anyone else take its weight. I have stood the palace posts for 19 years, and if there is one thing the years teach you, it is that a man's hands tell the truth his mouth is busy hiding. This man's mouth was full of pleasantries. He bowed to the understeward. He complimented the polish on the forecourt cobbles. He said the morning air of Eldermore was the sweetest he had breathed in a decade of travel. But his hands never once loosened around the base of the tall lacquered box he carried, and when the porter stepped forward, a good lad named Ellis, who had carried 100 crates of state gifts up those stairs without incident, the man turned his shoulder and said, smiling, "No, no. This one I bring myself. It is delicate. It is a matter of honor." A matter of honor. I filed the phrase away the way you file away the click of a lock you did not turn. My name is Vance Corriston, and at the time I was Serjeant of the East Watch, which meant the East Gate and the East Forecourt and the long gallery beyond were mine to keep. I was not a decorated man. I had no medals from foreign wars, no ribbon that made ministers lower their voices. What I had was a post, and a habit of standing it, and a way of watching a courtyard that let me feel a wrong thing arrive the way an old sailor feels weather before the sky changes. On that Thursday, the sky over the palace was the flat pale gray of late autumn, and the wrong thing came wrapped in gold ribbon and good manners. The box was as tall as a child and half again as wide. It was lacquered a deep oxblood red, banded with brass at the corners, and across its lid ran a ribbon of true gold cloth tied in a knot so elaborate it must have taken a servant an hour to fashion. On the front, set into the wood, was a small enamel crest I did not recognize, a silver heron standing in reeds, which is not the device of any house that pays tribute to the crown of Eldermore. The man who carried it wore the dark traveling coat of a foreign envoy and gloves of gray kid, and he gave his name to the steward as Master Fenwick, factor and agent to a merchant consortium of the coastal free towns, come to present a birthday gift to the young Princess Maelin on behalf of grateful traders, whose ships the crown's ships had lately protected from wreckers. It was a good story. It hung together. The Princess Maelin's 9th birthday was 3 days off, and the coastal traders had indeed sent tribute the year before, a set of ivory-handled brushes I remembered that had passed my gate without a whisper of trouble. Envoys came and went. Gifts came and went. There was nothing in Master Fenwick's papers, which the understeward checked twice, that gave the lie to a single word he said. And yet. You will forgive an old sergeant his and yets. They are most of what keeps a palace standing. Ellis fell back, cheerful and unsuspecting, and Master Fenwick came through the gate carrying his own gift with both hands, and I let him, because there was no lawful reason on earth to stop him. That is the first thing you learn about this work and the last thing you ever make peace with. The wrong thing almost always arrives with the law on its side. It has papers. It has a story. It has a reason it must be carried by this hand and no other. And you stand there in your red wool with your rifle grounded, and you let it walk past you. Because a sergeant who seizes every parcel that makes his neck prickle is a sergeant who is soon a gatekeeper of nothing, retired to a pension and a cottage, and a lifetime of wondering whether he was right. So I let it pass, but I fell into step behind it. The east forecourt of the palace runs 100 paces from the gate to the base of the grand stair, all pale flagstone worn smooth by 3 centuries of ceremony, flanked by gilded iron railings, and that morning, by the household beginning its day. Undermaids carried linen. A footman polished the brass of the great doors. 2 of my own watch, Tremond and young Aylard, stood their posts at the stair with the particular stillness that is not stiffness but attention. I had trained it into them myself, the trick of standing so quiet that the eye slides past you until the moment you are needed, and crossing the forecourt at an angle, with a governess trailing 3 steps behind and losing the argument about whether it was too cold to be out without a heavier cloak, came the Princess Maelin. I should tell you about the Princess Maelin, because this is her story more than it is mine, and if I am honest, it always was. She was 9 years old that autumn, or 3 days from it, and she was not the kind of royal child the poets like. She was quiet. She did not perform. Where her brother Torin, 2 years older, filled a room with noise and questions and the constant negotiation of an 11-year-old testing every edge of every rule, and where little Bram at 6 could not cross a courtyard without turning it into a battlefield or a shipwreck or a great hunt, the Princess Maelin moved through the palace like water finding its level, softly, watchfully, missing nothing. The household called her the Quiet One, and meant it kindly, and were mostly wrong about what the quiet was. It was not shyness. I had watched her for 4 years and I knew the difference. It was attention. The child noticed things. She noticed which footman had a limp on the cold mornings and slowed her pace so he need not hurry to open her door. She noticed when a maid had been crying and left a sweet from her own plate where the girl would find it, saying nothing. She had noticed, at 7, that the old wolfhound in the kennels had gone deaf, and had learned to stamp her foot so the dog would feel her coming through the floor and not startle. She noticed everything, the Princess Maelin, and she kept most of it to herself, and this is the single most important fact in the account I am about to give you. Her mother had noticed too. Her mother had been the late Queen Isolde, the king's first wife, dead these 3 years of a fever that took her in a fortnight and left the whole house hollowed out behind her. I had stood the corridor outside the sick room on the last night of it, and I had seen the king come out gray as ash, and I had seen the 3 children brought to say their goodbyes, and it was the Princess Maelin, 7 years old, who had not wept in the corridor but had gone very still and very watchful, taking in the faces of the grown people the way a small creature takes in a landscape it must now cross alone. She had been her mother's shadow. Queen Isolde had been famous in the household for the same watchfulness, the queen who knew a servant's troubles before the servant did, who caught a lie in a courtier's face before he had finished telling it. Some of that had gone into the ground with her, but some of it, I had come to believe, had gone into her daughter. And there was one more thing the Princess Maelin had of her mother, and it is the hinge on which this whole account turns, so mark it now. A little more than a year before the morning of the gift, when the household was still raw and the king distracted by grief and by his new marriage, there had been an incident. It was a small thing at the time, and I will not weary you with all of it here, but the short of it is this. A man had come into the palace with a grievance and a knife he should not have had, and it had been the Princess Maelin, 8 years old, who had seen the wrongness in him before any grown soul in that gallery, seen it in the way he held his coat closed on a warm day, in the way his eyes went to the doors and not to the paintings, and it had been the Princess Maelin who had done the one thing she could think to do, which was to reach up and take my hand where I stood my post, and squeeze it 3 times, hard. And look at me. 3 squeezes, it was nothing. It was a child holding a guardsman's hand, which happened at the palace a dozen times a week and meant a dozen tender nothings. But she had looked at me while she did it, and there had been a whole sentence in her eyes, and I, God knows why, call it the same weather sense that has kept me alive. I had understood. I had moved. And the thing that man meant to do had not been done, and he had been taken quietly through a side door with no blood spilled and no child frightened, and the king had never fully known how close a thing it was, and the Princess Maelin and I had never spoken of it in words. But afterward, a few days afterward, in the long gallery with no one near, she had come and stood by my post and looked up at me and said, in her small, serious voice, "If I ever do that again, the 3 times you'll know." "I'll know, Highness," I had said. "You won't wait to be sure." "I won't wait, Highness. 3 squeezes and I move. That's a promise between us." She had thought about that, the way she thought about everything, turning it over to see the underside. Then she had nodded once, satisfied, and said, "Good," because grown people wait too long, and had walked away to her lessons, and I had stood there in the empty gallery with the strangest feeling that I had just been made a party to something more serious than most of the oaths I had sworn in uniform. That was our signal. It had never been used since. For more than a year it had been a private, half-forgotten thing between an old sergeant and a watchful child. The kind of small solemn pact that grown people make with children, and then, mostly, let quietly lapse. I had not let it lapse, but I confess that on the gray Thursday morning the gift came through the east gate. The signal was not in the front of my mind. What was in the front of my mind was Master Fenwick's hands, and the enamel heron that belonged to no house I knew, and the 11 minutes past 10 that I would afterward remember with the terrible precision of the hour a hinge turns. Master Fenwick set the great oxblood box down at the foot of the grand stair, straightened, and pressed one gloved hand briefly to the small of his back, as a man does when he has carried something heavy a long way. The under-steward hovered. A footman came to announce that word had been sent up, that the gift could not be presented to the princess in person until her birthday, that it would be received now and held in the receiving room off the long gallery until the day. All of it correct. All of it the ordinary machinery of a palace receiving tribute. Fenwick bowed and said of course, he had come only to deliver it safely into royal hands, and would trust it now to the good keeping of the household. And here his eyes went, just for an instant, to the box and lingered, and I saw in that instant a thing I had not seen a moment before. He did not want to leave it. It was gone as fast as it came, that look, smoothed over by another smile. But I had spent 19 years learning to read the half-second before a man remembers to compose his face, and what I read in Master Fenwick's half-second was not the pride of a factor who has carried a precious thing a long way and is loath to part with it. It was closer to reluctance. It was closer, if I am to name it truly, to fear, as though the box were not a gift he was giving but a thing he was setting down among people, and he did not want to be standing too near it when the household's business took its course. And at that moment, crossing the forecourt with her governess 3 steps behind, the Princess Maelin came within 20 paces of the foot of the grand stair, and she stopped. She did not stop the way a child stops when something bright catches the eye. There was no rush toward the pretty gold ribbon, no cry of "What is it for me?" She stopped the way I had seen her stop in the sickroom corridor 3 years before, the whole small body going quiet and still, the head tilting a half-inch, the eyes narrowing not in confusion, but in the effort of attending very hard to something. She was looking at the box. Then she was looking at Master Fenwick. Then she was looking at the box again, and her stillness had a quality to it that made the hair rise on my arms before my mind had caught up to why. The governess, catching up, put out a hand. "Highness, come away from the draft. It's a gift for your birthday. You're not to see it before the day. It spoils the surprise. Come now." The Princess Maelin did not come. She stood there in the middle of the forecourt in her blue cloak with her small pale face turned toward the oxblood box, and I watched her look at it the way she had looked at the deaf wolfhound, at the crying maid, at the man with the knife. The long, patient, unhurried look of a child who has learned that the world is always telling you something, and that the trick is only to be quiet enough to hear it. And whatever she heard, she did not like. I began, without deciding to walk toward her. Understand that a sergeant of the watch does not simply abandon his notion of good order to trail after a 9-year-old's mood. There is a whole architecture of reasons why I should have stayed at my post by the gate and let the household's ordinary business run its course. The gift had cleared inspection. The envoy's papers were in order. The princess was in the care of her governess, and it is not the place of the East Watch to intrude upon the nursery's affairs. Any officer worth his ration would have stood still and watched and waited to be summoned. I had trained men to do exactly that. But there was the promise, and there was the look on the child's face. I crossed the forecourt at the unhurried pace of a man about his rounds. Never run in a courtyard unless you mean to start a panic. That is another of the things 19 years teaches you. and I came up on the Princess Maelin's flank at an angle that let me see what she was seeing. The governess was still coaxing. "Highness, really, it isn't proper. You'll have cook's honey cakes cold if we dawdle." And the Princess Maelin, without turning her head, said one word. "Wait." She said it quietly, the way she said everything, but there was a weight in it that stopped the governess mid-sentence. A 9-year-old cannot command a household. But there are children whose stillness commands more than a shout ever could, and the Princess Maelin was one of them. And the governess, a decent, harried woman named Pruitt who loved the child and was simply out of her depth, fell silent and looked to me, as people at that palace had lately begun to look to me when the princess went quiet, as if to ask what does she know that we don't. I did not know, but I was beginning to be very sure that she knew something. I crouched down on my heel beside her, which put my eyes near the level of hers, and I said low, so that only she and I and the governess could hear, "Highness, what is it you're looking at?" She did not answer at once. She was still attending to the box, her small brow furrowed, and when she spoke it was slowly, feeling her way toward the thing, the way she did when she was trying to put words around something she had felt before she had thought it. "The man," she said, "the man who brought it. Master Fenwick." He kept touching his back. Her eyes flicked to me and away. Like it was heavy, like it hurt to carry. Torrens' model ship is heavy. When Bram carries it, he holds it against his front and grunts. She was working it out aloud, and I held very still and let her, because I had learned that the worst thing you can do to a child thinking hard is to hurry her. But he carried it like cook carries the big kettle when there's water in it, all careful, level, like, she searched for it, like he was afraid it would spill. But it's a box. Boxes don't spill. The hair on my arms, which had never quite settled, rose again. I looked back at the oxblood box at the foot of the stair. The understeward had signed for it. A footman was moving to take it to the receiving room. And I thought about the way Master Fenwick had carried it, both hands under the base, level, careful, never tilting. And I thought about the way a man carries a thing he does not want jostled. And I thought about the words the child had reached for without knowing why they mattered. And a cold understanding began to assemble itself in me piece by piece, the way frost assembles on a window. There are things you do not carry tilted. There are things you keep level and still and cushioned, and pray the road is smooth. I had learned about them, long ago, in the one hard year of soldiering I had done before the palace, a year I did not talk about and do not intend to weary you with. But I knew, the way your body knows a stair edge in the dark, the particular careful walk of a man carrying a thing that might, if shaken, do harm. "Highness," I said, and I kept my voice as level as Fenwick had kept the box, "was there anything else you noticed?" She nodded slowly. "The picture, the bird on the front. The heron." "It's wrong," she said simply. "The traders sent me the brushes last year. They had the picture of the ship on the box, the little ship with the 2 masts. Mama showed me. She said that's their mark, the Seatown traders, the 2-mast ship. Everything they send has the ship on it. That's how you know it's really from them." She looked up at me, and there was no fear in her face, only a grave and terrible clarity, the clarity of a child who has caught the grown-up world in a mistake it does not yet know it has made. "That box doesn't have the ship. It has a bird, so it isn't from the traders. Somebody else made it. Somebody who didn't know about the ship." I want you to understand what I understood in that moment, kneeling on the cold flagstones of the East Forecourt. An 8-year-old, she was still 8, 3 days short, had just told me. From 2 pieces of evidence, a whole household of grown and clever people had walked straight past, that the gift now being carried into the palace under her name was not what it claimed to be. The man who brought it carried it like a thing that must not be shaken. The crest upon it belonged to no one who had any business sending it. It had been made by someone who wanted it to look like tribute from the coastal traders, but did not know the coastal traders' mark. And it was addressed to a 9-year-old child, and it was 3 days from the day it would be opened in a room full of the royal family, and every single fact about it that ought to have reassured me, the good papers, the good manners, the plausible story, now read, in the cold light of what the child had seen, as exactly the kind of careful work a patient enemy does. I did not yet know what was in the box. I want to be honest about that, because in the retellings that came later people like to say the old sergeant knew at a glance, and that is a story, not the truth. I did not know. It might have been nothing. It might have been a music box and a fussy man and a mismatched crest, and I might have been about to make a great fool of myself and frighten a household over a birthday present. Every reasonable instinct I had for the good order of a palace told me to go slow, to make quiet inquiries, to send a man to check Fenwick's papers again, to do nothing that could not be undone. But there was the child's face, and there was the careful, level, don't-shake-it way that box had come through my gate. And there was a promise I had made in an empty gallery more than a year before, that I would not wait to be sure, that grown people wait too long. "Highness," I said, "listen to me now and don't be afraid because nothing is going to happen to you. I need you to do exactly as I say and I'll do the rest. Can you do that?" She looked at me, and then, and I have turned this moment over 10,000 times since and it still stops my breath, the Princess Maelin, 8 years old and 3 days from 9, reached out and took my hand where it rested on my knee and she squeezed it. Once, twice, 3 times hard. Then she looked up at me with her mother's steady eyes and said, very quietly, "You said you wouldn't wait." I did not wait. There is a thing that happens to a body trained for 19 years when the moment it was trained for finally comes. The deliberation stops. The endiettes go quiet. The whole slow machinery of a sergeant's caution, the weighing, the wondering, the fear of being a fool clicks off like a snuffed lamp, and what is left is only the doing, clean and fast and without the smallest waste of motion. I have felt it perhaps 4 times in my life. I felt it then. I rose from my crouch. I did not run. Running starts panics, and a panic in a forecourt is a stampede toward the very thing you are trying to move people away from. Instead, I did 3 things in the space of as many seconds, each one small, each one certain. First, I put my body between the Princess Maelin and the box. It was not a large motion. I simply stood and turned so that my red-tunicked back was to the oxblood box at the foot of the stair and my front was to the child, and I said to the governess, in the flat, even voice I use when I want to be obeyed without a question, "Mistress Prewitt, take the princess back across the forecourt, to the far gate now at a walk and do not stop until you are through it. Take her to the west garden. I will send word." Prewitt opened her mouth to ask why, and I looked at her and she closed it, and she took the Princess Maelin's hand and began to walk. Good woman. Some people, in the moment, simply obey the voice that knows, and God bless them for it. Second, I raised my right hand to the height of my shoulder, fingers spread, and drew it flat across my chest and down, the watch signal for hold and converge, the one every man of my command knew in his bones, the one that means to the eye that catches it not danger, run, which sets a crowd flying, but come to me quietly now. Across the forecourt, Tremond at the stair saw it. His posture did not change by a hair. That was the training, the beautiful uselessness of a guard who can receive an alarm and betray nothing to the watching household. But I saw his eyes come to me, and I saw him touch young Ayllard's sleeve, and I knew the message was moving. From the great doors, the footman on the brass looked up, puzzled, sensing the change in the air the way animals sense it, but seeing nothing to fix on. Third, and this was the one that mattered, the one I had drilled into the East Watch 100 times against a day I half believed would never come. I turned to the wall by the gate where the old bell-pull hung, the plain brass ring on its worn cord that the household thought was a relic, a decoration, a summons for a porter in some bygone age. It was not a relic. It was wired, on my own insistence, and against a good deal of eye-rolling from the controller of the household, to the guardroom under the north tower and to the captain's post, and to the 2 barrack halls where the off-watch rested. 3 pulls in the code I had set. Not fire, not intruder at the gate, but the third thing, the thing we almost never drilled because it frightened the young men to think of it. A threat inside, unknown, converge and cordon. I took the brass ring in my white glove, and I pulled it 3 times, hard and even, and somewhere beneath the stone of the palace a bell I could not hear began to ring in rooms full of armed and waiting men. Then I turned back to the box, and I stood between it and the whole rest of the palace, and I waited the longest 90 seconds of my life for my brothers to come. They came. You would have to have served to know what it is, that sound. It begins as nothing, a change in the quality of the silence, a pressure in the air. Then it is boots. Not the measured tread of ceremony, but the fast, hard rhythm of men moving with purpose, from the North Tower, from the barrack halls, from the guardroom stair, converging on the east forecourt from 4 directions at once. The footman on the brass dropped his cloth. An undermaid with an armful of linen froze against the railing. And into the forecourt, in the space of a breath, came the royal guard of the house of Harrogate, not the ceremonial 2x2 of the changing of the watch, but the working thing beneath the pageant. 30 men in red wool and gray field dress moving fast and spreading wide, and at the head of them, still buckling his sword belt, having come at a dead run from the captain's post, was Captain Alder Roth. Roth was a hard man and a fair one and the best soldier I have ever served under. He came to a halt 3 paces from me, took in the forecourt in one sweep, the household frozen, the box at the stair, the child being walked briskly toward the far gate, me standing where I stood, and he did not waste a word on "Why have you rung the 3rd bell, Corriston?" He looked at my face, and my face told him, and he said only, "Talk." "The box," I said. "The oxblood box at the stair. It came in 11 minutes ago as a birthday gift to the Princess Maelin from the coastal traders. The envoy's papers are in order. But the crest is wrong, it's a heron, not the traders' 2-mast ship, which means it isn't from the traders, and the man carried it level and careful the whole way like a thing that mustn't be shaken. And the princess—" I paused, because this was the part that would sound like nothing to a hard man in a hurry, and it was everything. The princess saw it before I did. She gave me the signal, our signal. I'd stake my post on it, Captain. There is something wrong in that box." Roth looked at the box. He looked at me. And here is the measure of the man and of the house he served. He did not ask me whether a child's fancy was worth ringing the 3rd bell for. He did not ask whether an old sergeant might not have got the wind up over a mismatched crest. In the king's house of Harrogate the word of the Princess Maelin had, since the business of the man with the knife a year before, come to carry a weight that no one spoke of aloud but everyone had learned to respect, and the word of a 19-year sergeant who had never once cried wolf carried its own. Roth simply nodded once and turned, and became in an instant the thing he was born to be. "Cordon the forecourt," he said, and his voice did not rise, but it carried to every corner. Nobody in, nobody out, the household to the far walls, and kept calm, mind, no running. Vesset the stair, I want it cleared to the first landing and held. You and you, the great doors shut and barred. Where is the envoy? Where is Master Fenwick? And that was the first cold turn of the morning, the first of several, and it went through the assembled men like a draught under a door. Master Fenwick was gone. He had bowed and smiled and trusted his precious gift to the good keeping of the household not 4 minutes before, and in the small commotion of the princess stopping and the governess coaxing and the old sergeant crouching down to whisper with a child, the factor and agent of the coastal free towns had walked, unhurried and unremarked, back toward the east gate and through it, and into the streets of the city beyond. The gate porter, questioned hard, remembered him passing. Remembered him saying, pleasant as ever, that his business was done, and he'd trouble them no further, and a good morning to them all. Remembered that he had not looked back at the box he had carried so carefully and cared for so much. Had not looked back at it once. A man who has brought a birthday present a long way looks back at it as he leaves. He watches it carried up the stairs. He lingers to see it received. Master Fenwick had set his gift down among the king's family and left the palace without a backward glance, at the pace of a man who has posted a letter and would rather not be near when it is opened. He knew, I said mostly to myself. He knew what it was, and he wanted to be clear of it. Then we assume the worst, Roth said grimly, and we are glad the child is watchful. He raised his voice. I want the Master of Ordnance, and I want him now. Send to the North magazine, wake whoever knows the trade of quiet, dangerous things, and have him brought here at the run. Nobody touches that box. Nobody breathes on that box. Corriston, you say the envoy's gone through the east gate. I want riders on every road out of the city within the quarter hour, a description to every gatehouse and post-house, and word to the watch of the city that we want this Fenwick found, held and questioned, not harmed. He is the only man alive who can tell us what he brought and who sent him. Alive, do you hear? A dead envoy is a locked door. Riders went, the forecourt sealed, and in the sudden strange calm of a place gone quiet with fear, 30 men stood in a wide ring around a beautiful oxblood box with a gold ribbon tied in an hour-long knot, and none of them went near it, and every one of them knew that a 9-year-old girl walking away toward the west garden had, with a mismatched bird and a careful pair of hands, very possibly saved every soul in that courtyard from a thing they could not yet name. Word of that morning would take 3 days to travel the length of the palace and a great deal longer to reach the truth of itself. But the first fact of it, the plain, unarguable spine of it, was set in stone before the noon bell rang. The Princess Maelin had stopped the gift. One signal, 3 squeezes of a sergeant's hand, and the whole armed weight of the house had come running. Now we had only to discover what she had stopped, and who had sent it, and that, as it turned out, was where the true darkness of the thing began to show. The Master of Ordnance came at the run, as ordered, and the sight of him told the household more than any of Roth's careful calm had managed to hide. His name was Harlan Vell, and he was a lean, gray, unhurried man with the burn-smooth hands of one who has spent his life among things that do not forgive haste, and he was, in the ordinary run of the palace, about as visible as the drains. Nobody sends for the Master of Ordnance to admire a birthday present. When Vell walked into the east forecourt with his roll of tools under his arm and his apprentice trailing white-faced behind him, every servant pressed to the far wall understood at last, without a word being said, that the beautiful box was not beautiful, and a low, frightened murmur went round the cordon until Roth silenced it with a look. Vell did not go straight to the box. That was the first thing I noticed about the way he worked, and it steadied me more than any reassurance could have. He stopped a full 10 paces off and stood and looked at it, his head tilting the same half-inch the Princess Maelin's had tilted, for what felt like a very long time. Then he walked a slow circle around it at that distance, looking, only looking. Then he came to me because Roth had told him I was the man who had seen it come in, and he said, in a dry, quiet voice, "Tell me how he carried it. Show me with your own hands. Exactly." I showed him, both hands under the base, level, careful, never tilted, never swung, set down slow. Vell's face did not change, but something went still behind his eyes. "And the crest is not the sender's true mark," he said, "and the sender is gone at speed, not looking back." He nodded slowly to himself, the way a physician nods when the symptoms line up into a thing he has seen kill men before. "Captain Roth," he said without turning, "I want the forecourt cleared to 50 paces, not the walls, 50 paces, and everyone behind stone if there is stone to be had. Your men too. I'll keep my apprentice, and I'll want one steady man who won't flinch and won't chatter, and that is all. Serjeant Corriston will do if he's willing. The rest of you back." "I'm willing," I said before Roth could speak, and I saw the captain weigh it and let it stand. It was my gait. It had been my instinct and the child's warning. If the thing was to be looked into, I would not stand behind stone while another man bent over it. So they went back, 30 men in a household, withdrawing in good order to the far side of 50 paces of empty flagstone, until the great forecourt held only 4 living souls and 1 silent oxblood box. Harlan Vel, his apprentice and me around the box, and Captain Roth alone at the 50-pace line, close as he dared, because a captain does not send his men where he will not stand himself. What Vel did next took the better part of an hour, and I will not pretend I understood the half of it. He did not open the box. That, he said quietly as he worked, was the last thing a wise man ever did with such a gift. A lid is where they put the catch, the thing that answers when the lid is lifted, the reward for curiosity. Instead he went at it sideways and slowly from the base, from the seams, with fine tools and a small bright lamp, and a length of something like a physician's listening tube pressed to the lacquered wood, his face gone empty with concentration, his burned hands moving with a tenderness that was somehow more frightening than any violence would have been. Twice he stopped entirely and simply breathed and waited, for reasons he did not explain and I did not ask. Once he said, almost to himself, "Ah, there you are," in a voice so soft and so grim that the apprentice beside me flinched. And at last he sat back on his heels, and he took his listening tube from the wood, and he looked at me across the beautiful box with an expression I had not seen on a man's face in a very long time. The particular gray stillness of one who has just confirmed a thing he had hoped he was wrong about. "Sergeant," he said, very quietly so that his voice would not carry to the 50-pace line, "that child of yours, the one who stopped this, the Princess Maelin, what of her?" "When you next see her," Harlan Vel said, "you will tell her from me that in 30 years among dangerous things I have never once been shown my trade by an 8-year-old, and that I hope I never am again, because it means the 8-year-old was standing where she should never have had to stand." He wiped his hands slowly on the cloth at his belt. "This is not a birthday present. I will not tell you here and now the whole of what it is, because there are things a forecourt does not need to hear shouted, and because I am not yet certain of every part of it, and a man in my trade who speaks before he is certain kills people. But I will tell you this much, and you may carry it to your captain and no further. It was built by a patient hand and a knowing one. It was built to be carried level and opened careless. It was built to look like tribute and meant for a room full of the people this house loves most, and it was meant to go off 3 days from now, on a child's birthday in front of her family." He looked at me, and the gray stillness cracked, just for a moment, into something that was very nearly grief. Whoever did this did not merely want to strike at the crown. A man who merely wanted to strike at the crown has 100 easier days than a 9-year-old's birthday. Whoever did this wanted it to happen there, wanted the king to be watching his daughter open it. Do you understand me, Sergeant? This was not only murder that was planned in that box, it was cruelty. And cruelty of that particular shape is not the work of a stranger. The forecourt was cold and gray and very quiet, and I stood over the stopped gift and felt the whole shape of the morning change beneath me. Because a stranger, a wrecker, a foreign hand, an enemy of the realm wants a result. He wants the king dead or the house shaken or the coastal trade thrown into fear, and he takes the shortest road to it. He does not spend an hour tying a gold knot. He does not fashion a false crest and forge an envoy's papers and choose, of all the days in the year, the one day calculated to do the most private, most intimate, most unbearable harm, to turn a child's birthday into the worst hour of a father's life. That is not the work of an enemy of the realm. That is the work of someone inside it, someone who knew the household, someone who knew that the coastal traders sent tribute, and roughly when, and roughly how, but who did not know, because they had never troubled to love the details the way the late Queen Isolde had loved them, that the trader's true mark was a 2-mast ship and not a heron. Someone who knew the shape of this family's tenderness well enough to aim a blow straight at its softest heart, and who hated that tenderness enough to want to do it on the cruelest possible day. I thought of the enamel heron. I thought of who in that palace might reach for a heron, of all the birds in the world as a mark, and a cold suspicion, still shapeless, still nameless, began to stir at the back of my mind like a thing turning over in its sleep. But I said none of it aloud. Vel was right. A forecourt is no place to speak such thoughts, and a man who names a traitor before he is certain does as much harm as the traitor himself. I understand you, I said. What do you need? Time and quiet, and the box moved to somewhere with thick walls and no people, where I can take my time undoing what a patient man spent a long time doing. Vel rose, his knees cracking. And you, Sergeant, you and your captain, you need to find Master Fenwick before he reaches whoever sent him. Because that man knows the name I am only guessing at. And the moment the one who sent him learns that the gift was stopped, that the box never opened, that the whole thing failed, that is the moment Master Fenwick becomes a loose thread that a careful person tidies away. He met my eyes. You have until word of this morning reaches the wrong ears. After that, your only witness is a dead man in a ditch, and this house will spend the rest of its days wondering who among its own tied that gold ribbon. I went to find my captain, and the morning, which had begun with a matter of honor carried through the east gate, had become a race. The king was told before noon. I was not in the room when Captain Roth told him, and I would not repeat it if I had been, for what passes between a captain and his sovereign in such an hour is not a sergeant's tale to carry. But I saw the king within the hour, because he came down. King Alaric of Eldermore was a big gray-bearded man gone quiet and careful with grief in the years since Queen Isolde died. A man who had learned the hard way that the world can take from you the thing you cannot bear to lose. And he came down to the North Undercroft, where Harlan Vel had had the box moved behind thick stone, and he stood in the doorway and looked at the oxblood box for a long moment without a word. Then he turned, and he did not ask about the box, and he did not ask about the envoy. He asked, "Where is my daughter?" "Safe, sire," Roth said, "in the west garden with her governess and 4 of the watch, untouched and unfrightened. She does not fully know what she prevented, and we thought it best for now that she not." The king closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, there was something working behind them that I had not seen in the king in 3 years, not grief, which had made him soft and slow, but something harder underneath the grief, something that had been sleeping and had now come awake. "She saw it," he said, "before any of you. A mismatched crest and a careful pair of hands, and my whole clever household walked past it, and my 8-year-old stopped it dead." He looked at me. He knew me, a little, as the sergeant of the East Gate, no more. "You are the one she signaled." "Yes, sire." "There is a signal between you. It was not quite a question." "There is, sire, since the business a year ago, 3 squeezes of the hand. She gives it, I move, and I do not wait to be sure." I hesitated, then said the rest of it, because a king in that hour deserves the whole truth. "It was her mother's watchfulness, sire, the late queen. The princess has it. She notices what the rest of us are too grown and too busy to notice. This morning it saved us all." The king was quiet for a long moment. Grown men do not often weep, and kings almost never, and he did not. But I saw the muscles of his jaw work, and I saw him master something, and when he spoke again his voice was very low. "Isolde used to say the children would keep what mattered of her," he said. "I thought she meant her eyes or Torrens' temper or the way Bram laughs. I did not think she meant this." He drew a breath. "Captain Roth, I want the man who sent this found. I do not care what it costs or who it embarrasses. I want to know whose hand tied that ribbon." His eyes came up, and they were hard now all the way through. "And Sergeant, you will thank my daughter for me, but you will not frighten her. Do you understand? Whatever this was, whoever did it, she is not to carry the weight of it. She is a child. I will carry it. That is what a father is for." "Yes, sire," I said, and I meant it as much as I have ever meant anything. But the king's wish and the world's shape are 2 different things, and I already knew, Vel had told me plainly, that the weight of this could not be kept from the Princess Maelin entirely, because the Princess Maelin was the only living soul who had seen the senders mark up close and known it for false, and before this was done we would need her eyes again. The king wanted to carry it alone. It was the wish of a good father. It was not, quite, a wish the truth would allow. The hunt for Master Fenwick filled the rest of that day, and most of the night. Roth's riders had gone out within the quarter hour as he'd ordered, and word went to every gatehouse and post-house and coaching in on every road out of the city. A lean man in a dark traveling coat and gray kid gloves, giving the name Fenwick, factor to the coastal free towns, wanted by the crown to be held and not harmed. And for the first hours it seemed we had him. A post-house on the North Road remembered such a man hiring a horse. A toll keeper at the river bridge remembered passing him at a little after 11 in a hurry, paying in coin. The net drew in. Roth took a dozen men north himself at a hard ride, and I was left to hold the east gate and to wait, which is the harder duty and always was. And near dusk, word came back that they had him. I will confess to you that I felt in that hour the particular treacherous ease of a thing nearly finished. The gift stopped. The child safe. The envoy taken on the North Road alive to be brought back and questioned, to give up the name that Vel was only guessing at and I was only fearing. It seemed, for the length of one gray dusk, that the whole terrible business had been a single day's work, caught and closed by a watchful child and a fast captain, and that by morning we would have our traitor named and the house could begin to breathe again. It was a false dawn, and I should have known it, because the men who plan a thing like the oxblood box do not leave loose threads for a fast captain to reel in. They tidy them. The man Roth's riders took on the North Road was not Master Fenwick. He was a horse-coper's boy, 16 years old and terrified, who had been paid in silver at the river bridge by a lean man in gray gloves to ride north in a dark traveling coat, fast and visible, giving the name Fenwick at every post-house, and to keep riding until someone stopped him and then to weep and tell the truth, which was that he knew nothing, that a gentleman had paid him to play a part and no more. Fenwick had turned the whole crown's hunt north with a hired boy and a borrowed coat, and while 30 riders chased a frightened stable lad up the North Road in the failing light, the real Fenwick had walked, unhurried, in some other direction entirely, south, or into the warren of the old city, or onto a coaster's deck at the river mouth, and vanished. Roth came back near midnight, gray-faced and furious with himself, and he found me at the east gate, and he did not soften it. He played us, he said flatly. He built the box to be carried level and opened careless, and he built his own escape the same way, a diversion tied up with a pretty ribbon, and we all ran to open it. He's gone, Corriston, clean gone. And the man who sent him will know by morning, if he doesn't already, that the gift was stopped and the plot has failed. Which means, I said slowly, that they'll move to cover it. Which means they'll move to cover it. Roth rubbed his face. Vel was right. Our only witness is a ghost now, and the one who tied the ribbon has a night start on covering every track that leads to their door. By the time we know anything, there'll be nothing left to know. He looked at me, and there was something almost like an apology in it from a proud man who did not apologize easily. Unless what? Unless we still have one witness who saw the sender's true hand and didn't know it. He held my eyes. The mark, Corriston, the heron. Vel says it's the one honest mistake in the whole clever business. The one thing the sender got wrong because they didn't love the details enough to know the traitor's true mark. A false crest is a signature. Somebody chose that heron. And there is one person in this palace who looked at that box up close and knew the traitor's true mark cold because her mother taught it to her, and might nowhere else in this house she has seen a silver heron standing in reeds. He drew a breath. I don't want to bring the child into this. The king doesn't want it. God knows I don't want it. But she is the only eye we have left. And if there is a heron somewhere in this palace that belongs to the hand that tied that ribbon, the Princess Maelin is the one soul most likely to have seen it and remembered. I stood at my gate in the dark and thought of the king's face and his wish and his hand mastering his grief. She is not to carry the weight of it. I will carry it. That is what a father is for. And I thought of the Princess Maelin, 8 years old and 3 days from 9, who had already carried more of the weight of this than any of us, alone in the middle of a forecourt, with nothing to help her but her mother's eyes and a promise from an old sergeant that he would not wait. "We ask her carefully," I said at last. "We don't frighten her. And we ask the king's leave first, or we don't ask her at all." "Agreed," said Roth. "In the morning, we'll ask her about a bird and nothing more and pray she has seen one." I did not sleep that night. I stood a watch I was not rostered for, at the east gate in the cold, looking at the place on the flagstones where a beautiful box had rested for the space of an hour, and thinking about herons. And somewhere in the small hours, standing there, the shapeless suspicion that had turned over in its sleep at the back of my mind through the whole long day finally woke, and stood up, and showed me its face, and I did not want to look at it because of who it was. The heron was not a stranger's bird. I had seen it before. I had seen it in this palace. It was the device of a small northern house called the Varons of Marshelder, a minor line, poor in land and long in pride, a house that had married upward once, a generation before, and had never forgiven the world for not making more of them. The silver heron in the reeds was their mark. I knew it because I had stood ceremonial guard, 2 years before, at the wedding that had brought a daughter of that house into the very heart of Harrogate. For the Queen Consort Morwenna, the king's second wife, the woman who had come into the grieving house after Isolde and had never in 2 years managed to make it love her. The Queen Consort Morwenna was born a Varon of Marshelder, and the silver heron in the reeds was the device of her blood. I stood at the gate in the cold and felt sick. Now let me be careful here, because this is the part of the account where a lesser man ruins everything, and I have seen it happen. A device is not a confession. Half the doors in that northern county carried a heron somewhere, on a ring or a seal or a bit of old plate. A clever enemy who wished to cast suspicion on the Queen Consort could have chosen it precisely to point at her. Morwenna was not loved in that house, and I will not pretend I was among her admirers. I had watched her be cold to Isolde's children in 100 small ways, watched her move Isolde's portraits to dimmer halls, watched her make the 3 motherless children feel, without ever once striking a blow, that they were an inconvenience left over from a marriage she wished undone. I had cause to think ill of her. Which is exactly why I did not trust my own quickness to blame her. A guard who lets his dislike do his thinking is a guard who hangs an innocent and lets the guilty walk. The heron pointed at Morwenna. It could as easily have been meant to. So I did the thing my 19 years had taught me. I said nothing to anyone of what I suspected. I carried it to Captain Roth at dawn as a single dry fact and no more. The heron is the device of the Varons of Marshelder, a northern house, and I let him be the one to work out, as he did within a breath, whose blood that was. And I watched his face go carefully blank, the blank of a man who has just realized he is standing at the edge of a very deep hole, and he said, "Lo, you will speak of this to no one, not one soul. If it is her, we must have it proved beyond the shadow of a doubt before we so much as breathe it, or the whole house tears itself apart on a rumor. And if it is not her, if some enemy chose that mark to break the king's marriage and shatter his house from within, then God help us, that is a plot deeper than a box, and we walk more carefully still." He looked at me. "We still need the child, now more than ever, but we ask her about a bird, Corriston, only a bird. She is not to know whose bird, and she is never, ever to be pointed at that woman. Do you hear me? Whatever the truth is, the Princess Maelin does not spend the rest of her life believing she is the one who accused her father's wife. We asked the king's leave, and he gave it hard-faced on the same condition, a bird and nothing more. And so, in the bright cold of the West Garden the next morning, with the king himself standing a little apart pretending to admire the last roses, and Captain Roth pretending to inspect the wall, I knelt down beside the Princess Maelin on the gravel path, as I had knelt beside her in the forecourt, and I asked her about a bird. "Highness," I said, "you did a very brave thing yesterday, and a very clever one, and I want you to know that everyone is safe because of it. The gift is gone, and it can't hurt anyone now." She looked at me steadily, and I saw that she knew there had been real danger. You cannot hide that from a child who reads faces the way she did, but she also saw that we were all still standing, and it steadied her. "I want to ask you one thing, and then you can go and have your lessons and think no more about it. The picture on the box, the bird in the reeds, do you remember it?" "The heron," she said, "in the reeds, silver." "Yes, you told me the traders use a ship, not a bird, and you were right, and that was the cleverest thing anyone did in this whole palace all year." She almost smiled at that, almost. "Here is my question, Highness. That heron, that exact bird standing in reeds, silver on a dark ground. Have you ever seen it somewhere else? Somewhere here in the palace? Think slowly, take all the time you want. There's no wrong answer." I watched her go still and inward, the way she did, turning it over, and I confess my heart was in my throat because I did not know what I wanted her to say. If she said no, we were nowhere, the trail was cold, the traitor safe. If she said yes and named the room I feared, then a child would have led us to the door of her own stepmother, and no man there wanted that on the child's account, whatever the woman had done. The Princess Maelin thought for a long, long time, and then she said slowly, "Yes, I've seen it." The garden went very quiet. The king, by the roses, went still. "Where, Highness?" I asked, and I kept my voice as gentle as I could make it. "Where have you seen the heron?" "On the little writing box," she said. "In the small green sitting room, the one that used to be Mama's that nobody uses now. There's a writing box on the table by the window, rosewood with a silver bird on the lid, a heron in reeds. I noticed it because," she frowned, working it out, "because it's in Mama's room, but it isn't Mama's. Mama's things all have the wreath, the little laurel wreath that was her mark, but the writing box has the bird. So somebody put a not Mama thing in Mama's room, and I always thought that was strange and a bit sad, because it means somebody sat at Mama's window and wrote letters and it wasn't Mama." She looked up at me, entirely innocent of what she had just done, and said, "Is that the same bird? Did I help?" "You helped, Highness," I said, and my voice was not quite steady. "You helped more than you can know." I did not have to tell Captain Roth, whose writing box sat in the late Queen's disused sitting room. He knew. The king, by the roses, knew. In the 2 years of her marriage, the Queen Consort Morwenna had taken to using Isolde's small green sitting room as her own private writing place, a thing the household had noticed and disliked and never said aloud. The second wife installing her rosewood box on the first wife's table by the first wife's window. Everyone had let it pass. It was not a crime to write letters in an empty room. And now a child who noticed everything had told us, without the least idea of what she was saying, that the hand which tied a gold ribbon on a murder had signed its work with the same silver heron that sat, in plain sight, on the writing box of the king's own wife. But a writing box is not a confession either. And here is where the whole thing might still have come apart, and where the last hard turn of the account waited for us. Because a device on a box proves only that someone had access to that device, and Morwenna would say, and rightly, that 100 hands passed through that palace and any of them might have copied a mark from a box left in plain sight, precisely to make it seem that she had sent the gift. She had enemies. Everyone knew she had enemies. A clever accuser could hang the Queen Consort on that heron, and a clever guilty woman could hide behind exactly the same fact. We needed more than the bird. We needed the thread that ran from the box to the hand, and there was only one place left to look for it, the writing box itself, and whatever it held. The king himself gave the order to open it, and the king himself was in the room when it was done, because he would not let it be a thing whispered behind his back. If his wife was to be searched, he would stand and watch, and if she was innocent he would beg her pardon on his knees, and if she was not, he would look the truth in the face and not flinch from it. That was the measure of King Alaric, and it was the first time in 3 years I had seen the man he must have been before grief bent him. The Queen Consort Morwenna was summoned to the small green sitting room, and she came, and I was there at the door, because Roth wanted a witness whose word the household trusted, and, for reasons I did not fully understand until later, because the king had asked for me by name. She swept in cold and pale and imperious, a tall, handsome woman who had never in 2 years let anyone see her afraid, and she looked at the king, and at the captain, and at the rosewood writing box on the table by the window, and at me, and she understood in an instant that this was not an ordinary summons. "What is the meaning of this?" she said. It was not a question, it never was with her. "Madam," the king said heavily, "a gift was brought into this house 2 days ago meant for Maelin's birthday. It was not a gift. It was made to do great harm to her and to all of us on the day she opened it. My daughter saw the wrongness of it and stopped it, and we are all alive because of a child. The thing that betrayed it was a false crest, a silver heron in reeds, the device of your father's house, and that same heron sits this morning upon your writing box in this room." He drew a breath and his voice did not rise, but it shook. "I am going to have that box opened, Morwenna, here, now, in front of you and God and this sergeant. If there is nothing in it, I will beg your forgiveness for the rest of my life, but it will be opened. Because I will not have this house believe I was too much a coward, or too much in love with my own comfort to look." I watched her face very carefully in that moment, because it was my trade, and I will tell you what I saw, and it was not what I had braced myself to see. I had braced for guilt, the flinch, the flash of calculation, the mask slipping. I did not see it. What I saw, when the king said the heron of your father's house, was not the face of a woman caught. It was the face of a woman struck. Her cold composure did not crack into guilt. It cracked into something far more like horror, the horror of a person who has just understood that a knife has been aimed at her from a direction she never watched. She went white, whiter than her pride, and she said, in a voice gone suddenly small and unlike her, "The heron on the box. You are telling me someone sent a device to that child under my family's mark." And then, before the king could answer, her eyes went not to the writing box but to the door and past me, and she said, in a whisper that has stayed with me all my life, "Cassius. Where is Cassius?" "Open the box," the king said, and it was opened. It held letters. It held the ordinary correspondence of a Queen Consort, accounts, invitations, the cold, formal notes of a woman with few friends. And beneath a false bottom that Harlan Vell's careful hands found in under a minute, it held 3 things that did not belong to Morwenna at all. A wax seal matrix cut with the silver heron, freshly used, the wax still soft in its grooves, a folded sheet in a hand that was not the Queen Consort's, and a small stack of coin notes drawn on a coastal money house. The Freetown Traders' Own Bank, the very institution whose name had been forged onto Master Fenwick's papers. The folded sheet was a letter, half written and never sent, and it was in the hand of Lord Cassius, Morwenna's son by her first marriage, a soft, smiling, discontented young man of 22, whom the whole household had learned to find charming, and no one had ever thought to fear. And what the letter said, in the careful, clever prose of a man who believed himself far clever than he was this, that the king's affections had never truly turned from the dead Isolde to the living Morwenna, that Morwenna's place, and therefore Cassius's own place, and all the advancement he felt the world owed the Varons of Marchelder, hung by the single thread of the king's regard, and that so long as Isolde's 3 children lived and were loved, that thread would never be his mother's alone. The letter did not finish its own sentence. It did not have to. Vell, reading it over the king's shoulder, said quietly what we were all thinking. He meant to do it under his own mother's mark. If it had gone off, if the child had opened it and the worst had happened, the heron would have pointed the whole house's grief and fury straight at the Queen Consort. He would have removed the king's children and destroyed his own mother's rival, and inherited a great deal of his mother's suddenly vacant favor, all in one stroke. His mother was not the sender, sire. His mother was the second target. Morwenna made a sound I will not try to describe, the sound of a proud woman's whole world coming apart, and she sat down very suddenly on the chair by Isolde's window, as though her legs had been cut from under her. Lord Cassius was found within the hour. He had not run. He had not thought he needed to, because as far as he knew the gift had simply not yet been opened, and his patience had another day to run before a child's birthday delivered his whole design. When Roth's men came for him, he was in the tilt yard, laughing with two young lords, entirely at his ease. He was still smiling when they told him why, the reflexive, charming smile of a man who has always been forgiven everything. And he was still half smiling when he saw the king's face in the doorway and understood, at last, that this was the one thing that would not be smiled away. I will not give you the scene of it. The king did not strike him. Kings of Harrogate do not brawl with prisoners in tilt yards. But I have never, before or since, seen a man's soul leave his face the way Cassius's left his in that hour. The slow, dreadful draining of a person who has spent his whole life certain of his own cleverness, and his own charm and his own untouchable importance, discovering all at once that he had been outmatched, from the very first move, by a quiet 8-year-old who noticed that a bird was the wrong bird. The judgment fell to the king, as all judgment in that house must, and King Alaric gave it without heat and without mercy and without haste. Lord Cassius was stripped of his place at court and every honor the marriage had lent him, and delivered to the crown's justice to answer, in a closed and lawful court, for what he had designed against the king's children. And there is no lighter sentence in the realm of Eldermore for the compassing of harm against the blood royal, though the king saw to it, for the sake of the boy's broken mother if for no other reason, that it was justice and not vengeance that was done. Master Fenwick was never taken. He had been the hired hand of a hired hand, paid in coastal coin to carry a box and vanish, and he vanished so thoroughly that I believe to this day he is alive somewhere on some far shore, an old man now, telling no one the one story he dare not tell. It gnawed at Roth for years that the envoy slipped the net. It gnawed at me less. The hand that mattered we had found, sitting in a tilt yard laughing. And the Queen Consort Morwenna. I have told you plainly that I never loved her, and that I had watched her be cold to Isolde's motherless children in 100 small unkindnesses, and all of that was true, and none of it was undone by that terrible day. But I will set down honestly what I saw, because a fair account owes it. She had not sent the box. She had not known. Her own son had chosen her mark to send her, along with the king's children, to ruin, had judged, correctly, that no one in that house would think twice before believing the cold second wife capable of the cruelty, herself least of all. Whatever Morwenna had done to earn the house's dislike, she had not done this, and she nearly hanged for it under her own crest, betrayed by the one person in the world she had never guarded against. I saw her, in the weeks after, moving through the palace like a woman walking on the floor of the sea, and I saw her stop once, before a portrait of the late Queen Isolde that she herself had ordered moved to a dim back hall 2 years before, and I saw her have it carried back to the light. She was never warm to Isolde's children after that, but she was never cold to them again either. Sometimes that is as much as grief and pride can manage, and it is not nothing. Harlanvell sent his message to the Princess Maelin, in the end, through me, that in 30 years among dangerous things he had never been shown his trade by a child and hoped never to be again, and that she was the bravest soul he had met in a long gray life. I gave it to her one afternoon in the long gallery, and she heard it out with her grave attention, and then she asked me only one thing. "The man who brought the box," she said, "did he know what it was?" And when I told her yes, I believed he had, she was quiet a while, and then she said, "Then he knew, and he brought it to me anyway," and smiled, not as an accusation, but as a thing she was filing away, adding it to everything else she knew about the way the world sometimes was, and I understood that she was becoming, gently and too soon, a person who would spend her life seeing what others missed, and carrying it, and that the carrying would cost her something no one would ever quite see. Her mother's gift, her mother's price. The king came to the east gate himself, one gray morning that winter, which sovereigns do not do. He did not make a ceremony of it. He stood with me a while in the cold, looking out through the gate at the city, and then he said, "They tell me the bell pull was your doing, that you had it wired to the barracks against the eye-rolling of half my household years ago, for a day no one believed would come. I said it was so. And the signal between you and my daughter, the 3 squeezes, that was your doing too, a promise you made a frightened child in an empty gallery and kept. I said that was so as well. The king was quiet, looking at his city. A house is not kept safe by its walls, Serjeant, he said at last. It is kept safe by the few people in it who take the trouble to notice, and the fewer still who take the trouble to believe them. My daughter noticed. You believed her. Everything else, the captain, the 30 men, the Master of Ordnance, the justice, all of it, every bit of it hung on those 2 small things. A child who noticed a bird and a sergeant who did not wait to be sure. He turned to me, and King Alaric of Eldermore, who did not do such things, put his hand briefly on my shoulder. I cannot make the world always send you men who believe children. But I can see to it that the man who did is never again the surging of a gate that no one has heard of. And he made me captain of the inner watch before the spring, over the heads of men with more medals and better blood, for the single unmeddled act of having taken a small girl's hand seriously. I served the house of Harrowgate 11 years more, and I stood a great many posts, and none of them ever asked of me what that gray Thursday morning asked. I am old now, and retired to the cottage and the pension I once dreaded, and the Princess Maelin is a grown woman with children of her own, and she still, when we meet, takes my hand, an old man's hand now, spotted and slow, and I feel sometimes the ghost of 3 quick squeezes in it, the private language of a promise neither of us ever quite let lapse. People who ask me about that morning always want to hear about the box, what was in it, how close a thing it was. And I tell them what I can, which is not much, because Vel was a careful man and never told me the whole of it, and because the truth is that the box was never the point. The point was a child in a blue cloak who stopped in the middle of a forecourt full of clever grown people hurrying past a beautiful gift and went still and looked, and saw that a bird was the wrong bird, and who had the courage, being small and quiet and uncertain and 8 years old, to trust what she saw against the whole confident weight of the grown world telling her to come along, don't dawdle, the honey cakes are getting cold. She trusted it. She gave the signal. And because one old sergeant had once promised her he would not wait to be sure, the house still stands, and the king grew old with his children around him, and a good man's daughters have daughters. That is the whole of it. A gift that was not a gift, a bird that was the wrong bird, 3 squeezes of a hand, and a girl brave enough to be believed. She never once thought of herself as brave. That, I have come to think, is what bravery mostly is.